anger and avidya, ignorance. And so it's not as obvious with the mind. You can see it here, the first two. The mind can create karma even though it's not done necessarily to others specifically. It does have an impact on others, but it's not specifically sort of spoken or done. So the paying attention to, in fact, the other two come from the mind. So in terms of getting a handle on the mouth karma and the physical karma, the seeds or roots of that are actually in the mind itself, the greed. And the anger is one way to translate it, but it also has to do with both aversion. So the greed is the wanting, and the opposite of that is the not wanting or the pushing away. These are the two, greed and anger, the two faces of grasping or attaching. Oh, did I do something?
No, I'm just fixing the sound here. Okay.
Is this still working?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
So you're correcting my mouth karma here, but it's shutting off the mic. That's good. So where was I? And then it's the avidya, the ignorance, and not understanding things clearly, not seeing things clearly gives rise to, and from those then comes mouth and body karma. So really it seems as if the most inaccessible, being the mind, is also the most important and most fundamental. And that's why this teaching is all about the training and transformation of the mind. Because if you get on that ground, you work on Sindhi, the mind ground, all the other aspects come together. On the other hand, if you just work on the other surface levels of that and don't tend to the mind, it'll come back again and again and again. So what's this is saying? Intentional deeds, body, mouth, and mind, once done, once enacted, do not vanish. So this is the first thing. They don't perish without a trace. So it's not the case that you just do something and then, oh, it's gone. Even if you think, oh, I did it and I didn't get caught, or I'm going to forget about it, it doesn't go away. So there's a retaining element. The deeds once done don't vanish and perish without a trace. There's an effect. There's a repercussion, a resonance that's happening in the mind ground and in the larger world, so to speak. So there's both effect or impact and then accountability. So these are the two really key concepts to get on the notion of karma. It's not that it's done and then it's over with. It's just like you throw a rock in the water, waves are created, these waves go out and reverberate. Okay, so this, I mean, you can get that. But the other part of karma has to do with accountability. It's not just that things happen or that you do things and then they're gone or the impact comes back, but you have accountability. So what the Buddha or the texts are concerned with is what they call morally determinate volitional actions. Actions that are volitional, intentional, and they have moral determinacy to them. They matter in the realm of ethics of good and bad, right and wrong. They create a potential to bring forth results. So that potential for these things to bring forth results is called ripening. So the seed is the intentions. These are the intentional acts done. But then they can ripen. That ripen's called vipaka. And then finally, after the ripening goes through the process, it turns into what's called phala, or fruit. So actually karma is not just this one-dimensional notion, but it includes intentionality, cetana. And the Buddha said at one point, I say to you, O bhikshus, that karma is cetana, it's intentionality. It's not just action, but it's intentional action. So, I mean, we have to go into this a little bit, otherwise it seems rather vague. So it's intentional action, that's a seed, there's a ripening time, vipaka, and then there's a fruit, a corresponding to the ethical quality of those actions. So karma thus implies a capacity for these deeds that we generate to bring about morally appropriate, and I use the word appropriate, results rather than a judgment. There's a correspondence between them that is rather, how do I say this, almost clinical. They said sometimes they describe it as impartial. It doesn't have a special pleading in it. It doesn't have a special modifier in it. It's just very, very much this and that. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that for every this, there's a that, because it's very complex how it works. So the seed ripens. The seed of the intentional action can ripen. And this ripening, I said, is vipaka, and then it produces those fruits result. So the ripening comes back to us either immediately, and then the fruit comes, or it comes out in the second dimension, which is in the next life, or yet a third dimension in future lives. So you have chetana, the seed, you have and the action, karma, then you have a ripening process, and then you have a fruit. But it's not the case that this is immediate, but rather it can stretch out over lifetimes or a lifetime. So this life, next life, future lives, as long as we remain in what the text says, as long as we remain in samsara, we're just conditioned existence. We're completely just swept along by our karma and our actions and our habits and so forth. As long as we're in that and we're not leading a reflective, cultivated life, we're not taking the bull by the horn, so to speak. We're just sort of going with the flow of things. Then that stored up karma of ours will be capable of ripening as long as it has not produced these results. So this is something, it's somewhat inexorable or inescapable that this is the way it goes. But the complexity of this is really quite rich, and see if I can go into some of it tonight. The line that's interesting here in the text too, if you see, according to what is done, appropriate consequences are born. So that's dealing with deeds once performed, do not vanish. The consequences are born and they will come about. So we have that. Now, the idea of accountability is the next part of this. The doer is without any being. That is what Buddhists will say. So that's the third line. The doer is without a being. So what is that talking about? So I'll read Master Hua's commentary at this point because it's really quite useful. He says, within all of this, it certainly cannot be claimed that someone is controlling you to create all that karma. That is not the case. It is you yourself who create it. You yourself become deluded, create karma, and undergo the corresponding retribution. So this is the formula that's often given. You do the deed, you create karma, out of delusion. Because of delusion, karma is created. Once karma is created, retribution then follows. Then he says, there's definitely not some deity or heavenly lord who's controlling you and making you create karma. And I would say by extension, there's no heavenly being or deity that is also giving the results, punishing. So it's really interesting. The deed and the punishment are both within the realm of your own mind ground. So consciousness holds the seeds of this. The vipaka ripens on the ground of consciousness, and the retribution comes not from any external agent or force. So this is really interesting because sometimes we feel as if karma is a punishment. And this text and this passage here is very clearly moving away from that kind of analysis and say, no, it's not a punishment. You're not punished for these deeds. You're punished by them. And that's a very different, in other words, you're not punished for being a hateful, angry, spiteful person, but you're punished by that anger. And so you've actually absorbed the retribution into your own being. And it can manifest not just in your emotional state, but even in your physiognomy. So people who have, let's say, spiritual insight, I don't want to use spiritual powers because it's going down it doesn't require that. When you look at somebody carefully, and this is what great teachers can do, they can see the threads and the colors, the coloration of that karma and its retribution, working through your skin, through your physiognomy, through your sound of your voice, through the qualities of your character and everything. It's just like, to them, it's as obvious as you're looking up here at me tonight. It's not mysterious. In fact, I can remember my teacher once saying he says, don't be in a hurry to see all this. It's really not a fun thing. You do not want to have that vision because, it kind of takes the frosting off of what you think is. And what also is you can't cover it with cosmetics. So no matter how much cosmetic blah, blah, blah you do, you still will emanate. Others say it also has a smell. The sages talk about this, and when they meet a living being, they can not only see it, but they can also smell it, they can hear it. It's kind of intersensory how it manifests. That's how powerful and formative it is. So Master Wa goes on, he says, and so the line of the verse we're now explaining, the doer is without any existence, means there is no doer, there is no controller, there's no one making us do this and making us not do that. It's we ourselves who undergo the retribution according to the karma we ourselves have created. So this is really, this is where I think the Dharma, for me, is I'd say mature. It takes away the sense that I'm being controlled, I'm in the charge and in the control of others. It really puts it right back on your own lap. So that's why I have often said my interpretation of this is there's a radical freedom here because you are in the driver's seat. So the autonomy you wish for, here it is. It's like, and if you don't wish for it, sorry, you got it. So you have this radical freedom to direct, deliberate, to control, but you also have this radical responsibility or accountability. So they go hand in hand. Many people want the freedom and the autonomy, and then they want to be able to cherry pick the responsibility, the accountability. And I often hear this, when something good happens to me, wow, I did it. And when it's not, it's like, who laid that on me? Why is someone laying that on me? It's not my responsibility. People do this with their parents. Kids do well, that's our kid. Kids don't do so well, I don't know what's wrong with him. He's like got some gene off or whatnot, we tried our best, so on and so forth. So I'm not saying you're absolutely responsible or not. What's the determining factor, responsibility, the director, so to speak? Who's in charge? So agency is it's the dynamic, powerful, operating, doing dynamic. And it's contrasted to objects that are basically just reacting to natural forces. In other words, events that are not man-made, involving unthinking deterministic processes. So this is, sort of like the things of nature don't have agency. But the principle of agency, at least in philosophy, is that people are not just reactive organisms shaped by, like little lambs, and then shepherded by external events. And by that external events, I mean then it's sometimes translated, they're shaped by their fate, or they're shaped by chance, or they're shaped by predetermination, or luck, or chaos. Blank happens. I won't, because maybe children listening. So this is sort of the non-human agency view, that we're just reactive organisms. But the agency thing says people have power to influence their own actions and produce certain results. The capacity to exercise control over one's thought processes, your intentions, your motivations, your affect, and your actions all operates through this mechanism called personal agency. Now, what I'm saying is that Buddhism itself holds to this idea. So you are responsible. That's what it says in the verse we're reading. You're accountable, responsible for your actions. And Master Wa's thing I just read said it's nobody else making you do it. And correspondingly, there's nobody else you can blame or pass it off to. So according to this, it's quite exact how this plays out, the cause and effect. And it's very precise, even if, and I'm going to say this because I get this question all the time, and I myself work on it, even if it's hard to see.
If you have an immediate effect, you say something and you can see how it really hurt someone's feelings. And you can feel it viscerally, you feel it in your gut. You've seen the cause and the effect immediately with mouth karma. And sometimes this is very easy to spot. You just, oh my gosh, I wish I hadn't said that already, because you can see the impact. Especially true when you're working with children and their feelings. If you say something harsh or pejorative or hurtful, their faces will just react, their bodies will react. It's just incredible how quick it is. So that's sometimes how you can see it, but often it's not easy to see. Sometimes you'll do something or say something, and then years later somebody will come in, back in 1980, blah, 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 you remember when, what? Yeah, you said this. I never got over that. Whoa, you don't even remember. Or someone will say something, you did this. Or you did something, you thought you got away with it, and then you're during a retreat, you're meditating, you're bowing, all of a sudden, boom, the little thing comes up again. But where did that come from? It comes from the consciousness. The consciousness is holding all those seeds. So often what happens when you cultivate, and Han Shan talks about this, he said the energy from your cultivation, I'm using a metaphor, he doesn't quite use the same one, he uses a similar one, but basically it's like popcorn. Okay, so you put popcorn in these little seeds, right? And then you turn up the heat and they start popping. So when you start cultivating these seeds called bija that are in your consciousness, that are the carriers of this, the remembering devices, so to speak, of this karma, they start to open up faster because of the heat of the cultivation. So in a sense, cultivation can further the confrontation with your own karma in ways that wouldn't happen if you weren't cultivating. So this is why people have to be very careful and say, well, I'm bowing, I'm holding the precepts, I'm sitting, and all kinds of crap is coming up. And I'm going, sadhu, sadhu, it's really good. Because if it's not coming up, it doesn't mean it's gone away. It's just festering there, and it's going to come up eventually. So cultivation sort of changes the timeline, if I can use that expression, of the retribution and the furthering these seeds. So it's a very fluid, dynamic process in an event. So even though it's hard to see, there's a certain, I wouldn't say faith one has to have, but you have to keep an open mind and start working with the theory, working with the process of saying, for example, this is happening to me. Like cause, like effect. If this is the effect, then there might be a similar colored cause that generated this. And again, you may see it. Or you may feel, yeah, I have that tendency, I have that habit. Is that what it's about? Or you may not. You may feel as if I haven't done anything to deserve that. Oh, no, I'm saying, by the way, karma has good and bad results. So when we have good results, finally I deserve that. I worked, that's mine. It's only on the bad ones, like, I don't deserve that, right? Someone gives you a raise or gives you a check at the end of this, the term and says, here's your bonus. I don't deserve that. No. Somebody else gets promoted instead of you, they don't deserve that. So this idea of deserving, not deserving, muddies the waters of this. It's not about deserving or judgmental or punishment or reward. It's just about this for that. You put this in, that comes out. So what I wanted to do tonight a little bit was to say, this requires a certain amount of patience and trust to work with this theory. Two things come to mind. William James, the pragmatic philosopher, said there was lots that we didn't understand and we couldn't prove, literally prove scientifically, but we're better off in adhering to it and following it. For example, the will to live is something, you could debate back and forth, but he's saying you're better off following the will to live than denying it. Your life will be better. So, and he said a lot of religious belief can be justified pragmatically. You're better off believing in this and not believing in that, because the results that come immediately could be more beneficial than harmful. That's not true, he said, of all ideas, but you have to evaluate them on their return to your life, to the fullness of your life, or not that. Not on some absolute, they are absolutely right or wrong. So it's called pragmatism. That was his philosophy. I would argue that some of that approach applies to karma. We are better off, more operative, more functional, more mature, and probably more in charge if we assume that there's responsibility and accountability for our actions, and our actions carefully chosen lead to an untangling and an opening of our life, and unwisely chosen lead to the opposite, and to observe that. Now, that could be, I think, immediately accessible and immediately therapeutic. There's no question in my mind that just holding the precepts, not killing, not stealing, whatnot, have immediate beneficial rewards for yourself, for your relationship with others, for the whole community. Not everybody believes that and acts accordingly. Sometimes politicians don't, but I'm not going to go there. But I'm just saying in a very pragmatic way, this reminded me of when Heng Sure and I were bowing and talking to these police about karma and whatnot, and he said, so I kind of get it. He says, I can see that. The stuff we're dealing with, people make these mistakes, and it results like this, and some of them hurt others, they end up in prison, blah, blah, blah. If they didn't do that, that wouldn't happen. And he said, so how do you work with it? I said, well, we just start with these 5 precepts. Killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or intoxicants. And the cop said, so that's how you... He said, if everybody followed those, I'd be out of a job. And what he was saying was, in a very pragmatic way, the world, without even believing in karma, would be a better place if we acted from our intentions along those lines and refrained from, because the precepts are refraining from killing, refraining from stealing, and so forth. They're not necessarily talking about liberating life or generosity, which would be another component of following the precepts. You spin them positively, so you do the positive. Just stop the negative. That in itself, he was not a sort of metaphysical person, could see, hell, the world would be a lot better place if that were just the case. And that was a cause and effect observation on his part. He could see it. So I want to stress that sometimes, and I'm not sure why, partly there's a resistance to accepting karma because it means really taking responsibility for one's life. I know, and it sounds funny to say that everybody wants to do that, but I do think there's a very strong human tendency to not want to take responsibility for our lives. Let somebody else do it, let somebody else take care of it. Because it involves thoughtfulness, it involves honesty, a kind of bittersweet facing up to things and so forth. On the other hand, it does give a kind of integrity. And any event, so in some sense, people struggle with karma because they can't see it past the immediate and can't sort of prove that it's something that could happen in a next life or future lives because they may or may not believe in next life or future lives. The very interesting sutra text, I won't do it tonight, where this is called the Kalama Sutta, which some of you are familiar with. At the end of that sutra, the Buddha goes into this and asks, he says, okay, so you don't believe in a next life or future lives. Would there be any reason to act wisely and skillfully, kushala, and so on and so forth? And he gives this wonderful narrative, which is just really pragmatically accessible of why you would want to do that. Without even, and he said, you don't even have to know. He said, if you cultivate, you will know this clearly. But if you don't cultivate, you can still follow it and you'll get immense benefit from it. So I was just thinking about this is, we tend to consider ourselves sort of on the top of the pyramid food chain in terms of what we know. And this can be, well, actually, we know very little. And I mean me too. I'm not saying you guys know very little. We all know very little. But we don't think we know very little. We think we know a lot. It's almost like a tragedy almost, the degree of hubris we have with our thinking we know. And I would say it's not only about cause and effect or karma or prajna or wisdom, it's just in the valley of things of the way the universe works, the way we work. For example, on the micro world of quantum that we're getting into, and the macro world of galaxies, and we're so young and the field of knowledge we have there. We spend at least a third to almost a half of our life sleeping and dreaming. And we have no scientific explanation for why that is. We don't know why. I mean, you think about that. Albert Einstein, sometimes I find that hubris in scientists, but I also find humility. And this hubris, humility thing, Einstein said, the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. I can't understand most of his stuff. So if he's saying that, I should stand down a little and really think, what do I know? Isaac Newton, what we know is a drop, what we don't know is an ocean. I mean, these are people that made incredible breakthroughs in the understanding of the way nature and things work. Another one is this William Harvey. You know who William Harvey is? Anybody know? No history of science? Oh, gosh. Okay, I won't editorialize about TV, movies, AI. William Harvey was very much involved with the discovery of how blood works and what blood is about. He was a scientist, a British scientist. And he said, I maintain that all we know is still infinitely less than all that still remains unknown. So, and then you go to Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching. To know that you do not know is the best. To pretend to know when you do not know is a disease. So I'm bringing this out tonight with the idea, I stress this again and again, sometimes these texts are very obvious and straightforward and easy to grasp. Sometimes they push our envelope a little bit about what we can confirmedly say But if you follow the principles of karma and act accordingly, I could say with pretty complete confidence, things will get better. Things will get better. And the converse is also true. And this is why the Shila, the precepts, are considered the root of all self-cultivation. Why they're there is they give you a shot at getting out of the karmic morass. They give you a shot of sort of clearing the ground, getting the priorities straight, and not just being swept up again and again and again. So the agency here, I don't know if I'll be able to do as much as I want to tonight, but I'll get it started, implies a free choice. So agency implies free will or free choices, that we make our decisions. But how all this plays out is more complicated. And free choice is complicated in the Buddhist sense in that being free can be complicated due to clouds and what I say, clouds and constraints. Clouds and constraints. The clouds are the avidya, the misunderstanding, and the constraints are the klesha that are generated from that, the afflictions, greed, anger, torpor, stupidity, wrong views, and so forth. So these two together, the klesha, and then the clouds of the avidya, we're still responsible, but our freedom is constrained. It's not just free-flowing, because we got these contrary forces acting on us. The thing I compare it to, because I just finally figured out this concept, you know, in sports, tennis, baseball, basketball, football, whatever, they talk about a thing called unforced errors. Did you ever hear of that, unforced errors? Basically it's a missed shot or lost point, like in tennis, that is entirely the result of the player's own blunder and not because of the opponent's skill or effort. So I would say mostly the freedom that we lose in the autonomy has to do with unforced errors that we do to ourselves, and then we bring this on, klesha and habituation. So while it is free, and we are free to make it, these choices constrain over time, and the more habituation and the more negative karma we create, the more that freedom is constrained. We still have the responsibility, and it's still free, but it's not just openly free, it's not just generously free, and it's not clearly free. That's why we struggle. Should I not? Should I not? It should be like, duh, obvious. That's what they talk about. That's what wisdom is. Wisdom's duh. Duh, that's how it is. But it gets clouded by these habituations, and then it's not quite clear to us. Again, why you hold the precepts is to give yourself a concrete, practical base from which you will not change. And that allows your field of observation to gradually start to clear up. If you're not in that, then you're less free. You're still responsible. So it's very different. In the sense that there is still free choice and it's not predestination or fate. At the same time, we don't necessarily feel free while we're working through this. You do start to feel more free and more free and more free as you take control of this. It's quite amazing. So although it's said that everything that happens to us comes from what we do, it's not the case that everything we do is determined by what happens to us. So people get this mistaken notion, oh, if everything that happens to us comes from what we do, then that means that everything we do is determined by what happened to us, and that's not what karma is talking about. So the results are born of karma, but karma is not necessarily born of results. So this is why the results are called neutral. They play out and they're done. Now you can respond to them in all different ways and create more karma, but they themselves do not generate karma. So it's not the case, it's totally wrong, this belief that everything is a result of previous action. Never is what they say karmically wholesome or unwholesome volitional action the result of former action, being in itself karma. Karma result, vipaka, is not in itself karma, okay? The results, we call, oh, that's my karma. Technically, it's the phala, it's the fruit, and it's gone. So the critical thing here is if you're reflecting, when it comes and it goes, it's gone. Do not continue to create the seeds for it, because that'll keep it going. But it doesn't just keep going by itself. So I'll maybe stress this just once tonight, this idea. Deeds do determine the manner of rebirth. The manner of rebirth. Hells, animals, hungry ghosts, and so on. Deeds do determine the manner, but not the actions of the reborn individual. Karma produces a situation, not the response to the situation. So this is where the freedom comes in. It's really important to understand that. Otherwise, you feel as if you're locked in, you have no choice. Now, the texts are very clear. If you're morally dissolute and you waste your energies, then your window of freedom and opportunity really shrinks. And it almost seems like you have no choice, but you still do. And there's a lot more we could say about this. And so what you're doing with the precepts and concentrating and cultivating and whatnot is you're increasing the arena in which you can enjoy that freedom and operate from that freedom without constraints. The degree to which you don't do that, the murky constraints and chains and weeds or whatever you want to call them come in and make us feel as if we are controlled or victims. We have no autonomy, have no agency. So the other thing to end on this last line, this is what all Buddhists say. 诸佛之所说. This say we have to take as basically declare, they teach, they describe, they present. When the shuo doesn't just mean spoken, basically they communicate this to us through words, through embodiment, through text, through teachings. It's very interesting, but even if it's said that this is what Buddhists say, they do it in such a way not to say this is the law or this is the commandment of the Buddha, but it's really descriptive. It's really descriptive. In fact, that's why you have what's called the three turnings of the four truths. You know, do you know the four truths, right? Suffering, its cause, the elimination of suffering, and the path to do that. These are the four truths. But the Buddha, in teaching this, said it in three different ways. The first way he declared, he said, this is it. But he didn't stop there. He said, this is it because I experienced it. And so this is what all Buddhists say. All Buddhists say this because it's true. It's not true because all Buddhists say it. You know what I'm saying? So they are Buddhas because they see this clearly, and that's why they say it. But it's not the case that they say it, it's true because the Buddha said it. The Buddha says it's because it's true. So our confirmation of the second turning is, the first is declare, but the second is to exhort you to figure this out for yourself. So the second turning of the four truths is, so I can declare it, but the important thing is that you yourself know it. That's the exhortation. So I exhort you to take this up and practice it. See it like a really interesting experiment. Cause, effect, this and that. And the third turning is very interesting. It's called affirmation. You actually validate and prove it for yourself. And this is why it said, then you know for yourself. So that's why you have this next verse. As a clear, bright mirror, according to what confronts it, reflects each exact image, such is the nature of karma. I would, so much more to go into on this, but at least this is maybe a good start. Now this thing about knowing, I got to give you a little poem. This is a poem from, gosh, when did I read this? High school. This is by Stephen Crane. Anybody know who Stephen Crane is? No. Stephen Crane, Red Badge of Courage. Oops. Okay, never mind. He's a poet, 19th century poet, American poet. He's got a very short poem. He says, here's the poem. I met a seer, S-E-E-R. Do you know what a seer is? It's what you do to tofu before you sear it. No, what is a seer? S-E-E-R. I met a seer. Yes, Connie.
Like someone who can see, has like insight and can see into the future. I don't know. It's in the Greek world.
And you didn't look this up just now, did you? Good. Hooray! You're clearing the ground. Seer basically is another word for a sage, but you're right. Someone who can see into deeply things. So this is an ancient word for a sage. I met a seer. He held in his hands the book of wisdom. That's the line. Sir, I addressed him, let me read. Child, he began. Sir, I said, think not that I am a child, for already I know much. I know much of that which you hold in that book. Aye, much. He smiled. Then he opened the book, held it before me. And the last line is, strange I should have grown so suddenly blind. And it's a wonderful sort of acknowledgement of our wanting to know, our premature insisting we do know, and yet the reality of we know so very little. Now, I want to encourage along these lines the idea of, I did the pragmatics and I did it, just try it. Next time I maybe do the sutra, bring it in where the Buddha says, even if you don't believe in these lives and so forth, here's the reasons why you'd want to do this. It's very compelling, but it can be known. So this is what I'm saying. It's very difficult to know, and it's not so easy to see, but that doesn't mean it can't be known and can't be seen. If that were not the case, there'd be no reason to cultivate. You see, the whole dynamic of cultivation for transformation involves on being able to see cause and effect. So if this can't be known and can't be seen, then there's nothing in the path of cultivation. This is just a dead end, and you're just based on faith. And that is not a faith. This is not a faith-based teaching. It begins with faith or confidence, but it ends with gnosis or knowledge. So you have to understand that the goal of this is not to rest in faith, but to use faith to experiment and know for yourself. So this last passage I'll quote you. It's a really interesting one. This is from the Sutra in 42 sections, and a novice monk, nun, asked the Buddha, by what causes and conditions can I know my past lives and understand the ultimate way? So this person wants to know this. The Buddha said, by purifying your mind and preserving your resolve, your intention, not retreating, you can understand the ultimate way. Just as when you polish a mirror, the dust vanishes and brightness remains, so too, if you get rid of your desires and do not seek, be constantly hankering for things, then you can know your past lives. It will happen even if you don't wish to. So here's a formula. The formula is, how do I know this? It's not by necessarily reading philosophical text. It's not necessarily known scientifically exactly, but it is known by changing the subject that's inquiring. So what you want to know is that, but the means of knowing that is this. So by reducing desires, keeping the resolve, and just not seeking so madly, it will be manifest. It will open up before you automatically. So this is an epistemology. It's a way of knowing presented within this tradition that's very powerful. And I would say this is the difference between science and Buddhism right here. This methodology says that you can know these things ultimately. You will not know them simply by subject-object split experimentation, but you can know them through changing this. And this is argued, this is what all Buddhas teach, meaning this is a continuing, not one Buddha taught this and the other didn't do it or so on and so forth. Basically, it's what all enlightened beings know. This is where it's going. So, and tonight, last class for the semester, Ken reminded me that we're going to start up again on February 7th. February 7th. So you have time to do whatever to do things, to do karma, to plant seeds. Don't be afraid. Just as Master Wa would say, he says, don't be afraid. Just make sure every step you take is true. Don't worry about where you've been. Don't worry about where you're going. If you just walk each step true, then eventually everything will be okay. So, any questions? Comments? Sorry I spent complex time on this, but it's a complicated topic and a very important one. But I wanted to demystify it to some extent, but I also not make it too simplistic, because it's not, and yet it is. What's the great line? Do no evil, just do only good, and purify your mind. This is the teaching of all Buddhas. Oh, okay. Anybody, nothing? Announcements? That's a question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I can make it a simple question. I was just wondering the importance of the volition in the action to create karma.
The volition?
Yeah, why the Buddha emphasizes that difference of volition in the action versus if you didn't have volition in the action. So if you didn't mean to do something versus you meant to do something, that he's making that distinction, but is there really a distinction there?
The distinction has everything to do with the truths, the path. And the path is something that you walk. It's something that you do. All Buddhas become Buddhas because of this intentional, transformative steps they're taking. If that intention is not there, it's like the bodhicitta. Without the resolve, there can't be any fruition. So it's considered to be actually fundamental seed. That isn't to say, the text will say that actions, unintentional, do have effects. That's not to be denied. But they don't have the karmic effects on your development. That's the difference.
Why?
Because the agency again. You're responsible. Without that, the whole thing falls apart. Without having responsibility, without having agency, then there's no determining force. You can't cultivate. You can't set your mind and transform and become a different person, because it's all external things that are controlled. That's why I was saying it's very different than AI or robots or anything like that, which have no agency. So this idea of agency, choice, intentionality, I mean, this is why the Buddha has said so strongly, I say to you, cetana is karma. Intentionality is karma. Because this whole thing has to do with, if you follow the trajectory of his life, it was intention after intention after intention. And only by seizing intention is there really serious transformation. Otherwise, you're just at the whims of all kinds of things. So it's like, that's why it's so powerfully present when they say, Iche wei shin zao, everything is made from mind alone. It's made from mind alone, not abstractly or not, how will you say it, accidentally. But it's made from intentional. Mind means from intentional consciousness. So the whole emphasis on clearing that ground up and everything has to do with the actual mechanism for liberation. There's no mechanism for liberation without that intentionality and autonomy and responsibility and accountability. That's what that first line was all about. There are effects. Now, when you go into it, it's really interesting because there's a 5-grade scale about the different levels of intentionality. Circumstantial, intentional, without remorse, and so on and so forth. I mean, tonight we can't do that. But you get into the subtle psychological aspect of how we shape our lives. How we shape our lives. That's what the Dhammapada says. Our heart-mind sets everything in motion. And from this, everything flows. Just as, and it goes on, the cart follows the ox. This is from the Dhammapada passage. As the heart and mind goes, so everything else follows. This is a determining force and factor of basically the whole system. And we call it Buddha Dharma, but it's actually describing something that is not religious Buddhism, but a sort of a observation of the nature of things. So if we take it out of the realm of a religious belief and put it into an observable phenomena, then you work with that. I don't know if that answers. It's not necessarily a complicated question.
I think you touched on most of it, but I think the one lingering thing is,
The what?
so if you don't mean to like kill an ant or something, is that not going to come back to you in karma?
Right. I mean, the simple thing is I've seen, I won't say who, even sometimes Buddhists, oh, you stepped on an ant, you killed an ant, you're going to be killed. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work because without intentionality, there's no responsibility. And without responsibility, there's no agency to walk a path and change and transform. So the whole key of this is that it's visible, it's operative, it's understandable, and one can work with it. And that's why you can cultivate to become different. If that's not the case, then there's no intentional change. Change will be happening all around you, but it won't be driven by intentionality. It won't be driven by consciousness. It'll be just happening, which is exactly what happens when one is in a state of unintentional habituation. It's still going on. There's still impact. But even there, the Buddha was saying, even the deepest habituation came from a choice. Now, over time, it may seem as if it's no longer under your control, but it is, and you're still responsible. So this is why in the 5-grade breaking down of karma responsibility, someone who knows it's wrong, absolutely wrong, and still does it, but is not aware anymore, the amoral, is the hardest one to get out of. The serial killer, for example, that feels nothing. Still responsible, but the window to see intentionality and take responsibility has almost shut down completely at that point. So this is the most dangerous position to get. But it didn't begin that way. So this idea of tracing cause and effect, gradually leading here or there, is really the key to self-reflection. And without that, there's no agency. And without agency, there's no transformation. There's no Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. They all come about through change. Huh. Okay. Do you have any announcements? Are you done with your travels?
Pretty much.
Down with travels.
CDB tomorrow for the Amitabha session.
Yeah,
Traveling still here though, in America.
yeah, we were in China, a week break. We just back from Taiwan yesterday, from Taipei in the evening.
Okay, you're coming back. Others are going tonight.
Tomorrow we are going to CTB from Amitabha session. So this is gonna happen. Tomorrow we start the 7 days of Amitabha session in the City of 10,000 Buddhas. Definitely it's a good place to illuminate light and see more closely cause and effect in our lives. I don't know that people can apply for it. It's already closed, I think, probably. You can talk to us if there's some urgent wish to join. Definitely it's opportunity. And this wonderful environment and deep transformational experience for those who attended. So this is Amitabha session. And here at the monastery, every day you can meditate. 5 p.m. we open the door, 5:15 starts meditation for an hour. And we have some online lectures. Rabbi Heng Sure still is lecturing on Avatamsaka Saturday, 7:30 p.m. On Thursdays, inside Berkeley Inside Meditation group have in person. Am I right, Roger? It's every Thursday right now? Twice a month. So twice a month here, you can check on our website, berkeleymonastery.org. And if you want to see James Barras or Yves Decker, you can come those times. Stephen Taylor on Wednesday offer classes online. And I think this is it, right? James Marshall, anything else? And Marty just mentioned there will be a winter break, not the last lecture. He will return February 7th, right?
I intend to return.
attend, we'll see. What karma will play with that, we never know. It's February 7th, and that's just it. So stay tuned, and we'll hope we can see you again next year, right? 2025.
Okay.
So we can do the transference. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of painters into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. 3 bows. Bowing respect to the triple jewels.